public-facing work that the university does. My main role is to make sure that the university makes the right contribution to society and enable people to connect with the university and its work.
Brilliant, thank you. And to Chris, over to you.
Hello, my name's Chris Williams. I live in the Highfields on St Peter's Road. I'm a historian. I work for the Open University. I also work for an organisation called History and Policy, whose job it is to get historians in the UK together with people in government at all levels to try and see if we can learn lessons from history. And also, for the last couple of months, I've been working with Kirk and others locally to try and set up the mutual aid organisation, which we have successfully done in a number of wards in Leicester. The one I've been focusing on is the ward that myself and Kirk both live in, Stonygate.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Chris. So why I've got Chris and Mark on the show today, the last bit of this is probably my last show now for the radio station. We've spoke about COVID-19, the impacts, the effects, the community, some of the great work that's going on around food banks, and some of the things that Chris just touched upon about mutual aid groups being set up and all the voluntary work that's been done. The bit that we haven't covered, and what these two guys have been looking at, and Mark's been doing a piece of work with DMU, me and Chris have been talking behind the lines with some academics about this, is what the recovery stage will look like following COVID-19. So there's talk more recent now that, you know, we're coming out of this lockdown period, potentially we will go back into a lockdown period. What will this mean for the economy, for jobs, for education, etc., etc.? So there's some forward thinking been going on around this. It's not just how do we get the shop back open, or how do we get the kids back into school? There could be some long-term ramification. I can't remember one of the reports we spoke about, Chris. Did he say it was a 7-year impact this potentially could have on a number of different areas across the whole of society? Is that right? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think if you look back at analogous events, if you look back at the times in the last century when the UK was sort of thrown off track to such an extent, which were basically just the 2 world wars, you can kind of see the ripples from those going right back. If you look at rationing, Second World War ends in 1945, but all the rationing and identity card controls, for example, they don't go until the early 1950s. So it's a long time afterwards. So, it would be nice if we could just go back to the nice bits of normal.
Yeah, it will be a challenge. And Mark, at DMU, your role around DMU and looking at this recovery cell or recovery hub, if we call it that, has been more
even unraveling all the things we've had to do.
Oh, we seem to have a little bit of a time delay here, but it's okay. Go back to you, Mark. So we've been looking at a more strategic overview of the recovery cell, and DMU have been leading on a piece of work. How many academics have been involved in this? Was it 70 plus at one point?
Yeah, it's still 70 plus, and
wow.
And a few more this week actually who've learned about it via other channels in the university have come forward as well. I think it's because I think the attraction to it is that there's a natural will to want to help things get better. I think that's a big part of DMU anyway, that we have that mission to serve the public. But in this time, we had a great response for volunteers in the first instance to actually just go out and do things like food parcels and medicine deliveries. And then this piece of work that came along was a real opportunity for people to use their skills and knowledge across all the disciplines that we teach at the university. There's knowledge there that can be shared, and some of the challenges that were coming back that we were hearing externally just enable people to say, a little bit like Chris said, you can look back in history and say, what happened then? This could be some sort of model of what will happen now. You can apply that kind of thinking in any context, from pharmacy to 3D printing. You can start applying this level of thinking about what will it look like, what can we learn from things that we've done before, and what can we potentially predict or alleviate alongside that prediction. So it's been really fascinating, because we've had 5 seminars, I guess you would call them, where we sort of really talked through the 5 areas that that are being looked at by the local authority, Leicester City Council. So health, I'll forget one of these, but health and humanitarian, community, economy, environment, and go on. There's another one. I
think that was 5,
infrastructure.
Wasn't it? Infrastructure.
Yeah. And what's been interesting is that people with expertise in health are now joining the debate around environment, to say that the environment's improving and our health is improving. So there's something in this, maintaining the good environment. And then some environmentalists were working alongside business academics around how when we do reboot and factories go back to work, how can we maintain this level of air quality and while having efficient outputs for business, but also trying to hang on to some of the positives that we've seen. So it's been really interesting to see the interlinkages between these areas and hear the ideas that are coming forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to be crucial so we can try and assure communities, put communities back together, try and look after our economy, but do things potentially that we haven't been able to do because society's just set itself that way. This is a kind of a reset opportunity for all of us. And I think the discussions that we've been having and how we want to see that going forward, everybody is rightly going to focus on how do they get back to a point. But what we've been talking about is how do we do things differently past that point to improve the city and to improve the communities and to improve people's lives going forward. And I think that's a really important point. From history, Chris, what's going to happen on the back of this for us if there's a repeat of history going forward?
Well, one of the things I normally end up doing when I'm talking to people in central government and local government as well is to say, unfortunately, there's never a clear repeat of what's happened. You know, what we can do as historians is kind of offer a context and say, well, when this happened in the past, this or that were the conclusions that would be drawn, or these were the effects. On the other hand, you know, each situation is always different, is always unique. So there's no kind of single clear, whatever you do this. Occasionally you sort of get the, you know, whatever you do, don't do that. And maybe if you look at the really big picture and compare how Britain came out of the First World War compared to the Second World War. In very much after the First World War, it was a case of we're going to get back to normal just by letting everything reset itself. And what you ended up with was a horrendous, nasty recession. You ended up with massive unemployment, 1919, 1920, as well as just the flu pandemic that's going on economically all over the place as all the government investment just crashes. Far better in 1945, 46, because government is ensuring full employment. And so because a lot more work is done during the Second World War to see how are we going to work out demobilisation, what are we going to do after the war, you don't get a massive crisis of unemployment and demobilisation happen 1946, 47. There's jobs for everyone. There's a lot of work needs to be done. Whereas in 1919, 20, the economy is going up and down all over the place, and it gets put on the gold standard at the wrong height. And a lot of the problems of the 1920s are about kind of that demobilisation moment, not being sort of actively managed. So if there is one big lesson from the 20th century, it's get thinking about it, get planning. And a good thing about Leicester, actually, Kirk, is that you approached me, I don't know, it must have been about 6 weeks ago, you started talking about this reconstruction. I'm also in touch with central government through my history and policy role. And it wasn't until about 3 weeks ago that they started saying, right, we need historians who can talk about, medium term, long term planning next 18 months. We'd already been thinking about that locally for about 3 weeks at that point. So it's good to be reassured that Leicester's ahead of the game here.
We're groundbreakers here in Leicester, Chris. You know that. Look, I know we're on radio, but there's also social media feeds. I've got my Leicester City shirt on today just to demonstrate that point, that we can make the impossible possible here. That's the thing. Looking at the recovery stuff going forward, Mark, I know we've got a different number of cells that we're working on and whatever, but I think as we kind of breaking them down now, there's two that really jump out. There's going to be the economic impact and there's going to be the social impact. And the challenges for the city around, we've got a big cohort of our population, 18 to 25, that potentially will be out of employment. So we've got to focus on these groups where we know there's going to be issues. and how we can get them into employment or get them training and keep them going. Because like Chris just said, we don't want big waves or scores of people out of employment or education, because it will be problems coming forward. And then the social element is, how do we integrate our communities back together? Leicester's held up as an example of good practice across the country in terms of how communities live harmoniously side by side, and we don't see the tensions that we do across other areas. We've got some challenges.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm feeling quite optimistic, actually, because we're starting a series of consultations with the community next week after the bank holiday, and the will of community partners in the city, and these really are groups that are on the front line of everything at any time, not just COVID-19. These groups are there all the time, working in our wards, trying to support young people, trying to support the elderly, trying to support the most vulnerable. And so I sent out via Val and via neighbourhood services at the council the opportunity to talk about some of these issues next week, and come up with some ideas to co-create things to make our communities more resilient and position Leicester as a front runner in the recovery. And my email box has actually been swamped with responses of people wanting to get involved and have their say. So I feel quite optimistic. And I know that this is the early stages is around discussion, but these discussions are quite fundamental to co-creating ideas that will stick and that will generate that way of working differently in the future. I think there's always a lot of frustration that people who work with communities on the front line feel like they're not being heard, or they not being supported. And I think one thing that COVID-19 has really proved, and I'd be interested actually to hear what Chris thinks about this from a mutual aid point of view, is that we're now starting to respect people who do some of the jobs that aren't so visible in our society.
Absolutely,
people who are there for others all the time, and but don't necessarily get the I wouldn't say accolade, but they don't necessarily get the respect that they're due. And I think that this could be a watershed moment in how the country views these community networks. So I'm quite excited and optimistic that we can come together and have that conversation in Leicester, and try and again position ourselves as pushing this agenda forward, rather than carrying on and allowing it to be something that we all take for granted. Because I think pre-COVID, all of these groups were taken for granted to some degree.
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo that. I mean, the amount of work, and I speak about the Muslim community because of the radio station and everything else, but the amount of groups that have come together and delivering on the front line and just getting on with it, providing food, providing support to those that are isolated. I mean, we've had 2 shows where we've had groups come on here and tell us about the work that they're doing and how they've found it. And the one thing that they've all said is, how can we maintain these networks between us going forward? And they've all said that. So it's something, very early on, again, we established the Leicester Community Response kind of platform, similar to what the Mutual Aid were doing. Ours was just on a smaller scale and not citywide. And we had like 300 volunteers sign up to this group within just like that, straight away. The will's there, and some of the levels of professionalism and their academic prowess and what they do, from doing anything to nothing, people just willing to help out. And how we capture that and hold that going forward, I think, is going to be crucial to whether we can move collectively through this recovery phase, or we have to do it fragmented. And I'd prefer to do it as a collective, to be honest. Chris?
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that has really struck me in the last couple of months are the number of people who are willing to help out. And when the people who step forward, the number of different communities people are coming from as well, and the willingness to work across communities, and the fact that networks that were there, were working hard, but were kind of invisible or taken for granted, have now been joined by like maybe 2 or 3 times as many people who've thought, right, actually, now now's the time for me to step up. And then so there's far more people now. There must be hundreds or low thousands of people across the city now who have got a good idea of what keeps it going and what kind of fills in the gaps in provision and who does the helping out, on the day-to-day basis. And so there's far more awareness of what's already going on. People have got far better links with each other. And the other thing I think is that we've also discovered how resilient a lot of our communities already are. So, for example, taking Stonygate, it's almost like a microcosm of Leicester, goes down from Conduit Street to Gartree Road. You've got a lot of different sorts of community in there, a lot of different religious backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. Nearly all of those different sorts of community in their own different ways have succeeded in helping people out. So we've got this mutual aid network and we're sitting around going like, oh, no one's ringing us up. We're getting phone calls every so often. People are, haven't got anyone to turn to, but nearly everybody, 20,000 odd people, has got a neighbour, has got a friend, has got a relative, has got a mate they can call on. The existing level of resilience in the city is pretty good. The city kind of works quite well. And even under these massive conditions of strain, we've been able to keep it working. And so our job is to stay together and keep mobilising that new layer of organisers and volunteers, people like me, who kind of took it for granted beforehand, but now realise we've got to do a little bit more working just to keep reproducing the city, keep reproducing a city that works. And we've got a great example of the city of solidarity, which has sprung into being over the last couple of months. We've got a great example to follow. And, and I would also single out the Muslim community, not the only community to step forward, but one that did from day one in a really impressive way. I was hearing people just basically offering their last stuff to people they'd never met before who they knew were in need, and that was like a really powerful time. I think it changed the way I've seen the city, it stopped me from taking a lot of stuff for granted.
Absolutely. We had Gold Hill Adventure Playground on the show. You probably weren't tuned in a couple of weeks ago. And they were saying that the mosque in Stonygate, the big one, Masjid Umar, was providing food parcels for Gold Hill Adventure Playground in the middle of Saffron Lane. And, the guy, Josh, one of my good friends, he was like, 5 years ago, who would have ever thought that Saffron Lane families were receiving food parcels from a mosque in the middle of Stonygate or wherever it may be? It just wouldn't have been heard of. And, it shows how much, communities are just mobilizing when they need to. And we do need to find a way to keep this going. So, Mark, when we were doing our discussions and we were putting these labels to sales and et cetera, you came up with a really interesting new cell or a new theme, which was Future City. And I really like that. And I've took that away and ran with it in other things. So if you see it pop up, it's come from me, but by yourself. So I won't apologise for that. But yeah, I stole that a bit. What's a future city potentially going to look like or could look like? I don't know what's happened on my screen.
So the vision of talking about a future city was really to say, well, let's have some radical ideas. If we've got to change everything, why don't we just change everything completely? And it was just a space for people to start coming forward and throwing out ideas that we wouldn't necessarily fit into any theme, but actually would be an aspiration for the city. And so one of the things that it's quite broad, because you have to understand everyone wants to lean towards technology at the moment, and we're using technology brilliantly right now to do this radio show, but not everyone has access to that technology. So when people start talking about the future, they immediately start thinking about the capability of technology, and there's some brilliant pieces of work that's been suggested about having a contactless city where no money changes hands whatsoever, and how can we get to that point. But also consideration that in a future city, everyone will have to be digitally literate. So how do we empower people to have the skills to use the technology to get round Leicester as a smart or digital city? So that's kind of an example of the breadth of the thinking, is that, well, we want to harness this, and we've known that technology has made our lives easier through this environment, I know some university students, for example, who've had to finish their dissertations on their mobile phones because they don't own laptops. So while it's been a great enabler for people like us during this time, it's been a prohibitor to another section of society. So we need to, lots of the future city thinking is around leaving no one behind and making sure that everybody has this opportunity. And then when you start thinking of things in that context, that nobody should be left behind, you can start coming up with some fairly radical ideas. So discussions around how we keep support people to not be homeless or not become homeless. Could Leicester be the place that has no incidents of homelessness, but has ways and means of keeping people off the streets and supported in those vulnerable circumstances? So it's a huge piece of work around throwing out the problems you would have to overcome to have a future city, but also you can have a discussion about, well, in order to have no homelessness, for example, we as a society are going to need to provide X, Y, and Z. And does this pandemic present us with that opportunity and the means for it? So it's a place where these things can be envisioned and we can work towards these ideas. And what I like about it so far is that in the future city, people aren't talking about walking or traveling around on flying skateboards. They're actually talking about practical problems that our societies face.
There wasn't anybody that put flying skateboards in there. That's disappointing, that is, actually.
Yeah, maybe I'll write that down.
Yeah. Chris, for you, what would you like to see in a future city, if there was a couple of things that would just spring to mind that you'd like to change if we could, starting from now, kind of thing?
I think, now you're talking. I think a city that that knew more about itself, a city that would find it easier to come together. The last couple of months have been a sort of bizarre inversion of that amazing time 4 years ago, when suddenly the centre of Leicester was transformed into this party. When, because we'd won the league, and I'm using we as a kind of quote marks here because City aren't actually my team, but it was just really good to join in the party. Just the sense of like, you're walking around the street, you've got something in common with everyone you see, you can smile at them because they know why you're smiling and they will be able to smile back, you will be able to communicate with everybody. That was a really interesting and differently strange way, those few weeks. And these last couple of months have also been indifferent and a lot more strained and often a lot more tragic and unpleasant, but also optimistic in some respects. Another strange way of being around the city. I'm going around on a Saturday, I see 3 people in Gallery Gate. That's kind of weird. But I think just opening out those possibilities of how change is possible, that there's a whole lot of different ways we can use the city. It doesn't always have to be a bit like it was before, but slightly busier, slightly noisier, slightly faster, and maybe leaving a few more people behind. And I do think that sense of like, we're all in this together, ways of like being able to sort of transmit that sense more around the city. People, for example, maybe we need to think about moving around the city more. You're talking about a food parcel moving to Saffron Lane. Maybe we need to work about what are the institutions that mean that, kids who are growing up on, Conduit Street or near Conduit Street will also, for whatever reason, hang out in Hamilton some weeks or hang out in, Ayers Monsell or Birstall or Belgrave. I mean, the city that we use is often this like little strange pizza slice into the city centre and 3 or 4 places we drive out to Leicester Forest East. We go to the big shop. Are there ways we can make it so as you move through it rather than over it? Don't know how random all that stuff is. Maybe this is because I cycle everywhere. I suddenly realise how little of the place I know, how much I might be missing, and how it's been a bit weird cycling around it these last couple of months. I've been moving around different places in a different way.
On the cycling, somebody that absolutely does not, I don't even think he has a bike, to be honest, was talking about these cycle lanes to me the other day, saying, all these lanes are popping up all over the place. I was driving, then there's cones for 10 miles. What's going on? I was like, yeah, their cycle lanes, looking at opportunities of how to increase cycling in and around the city, blah, blah, blah. And they said to me, they goes, oh, it's really good when the weather's like this, but what happens from August right through to the back end of February, March, when it's teeming down with rain most days, freezing cold and blah, blah, blah. These become redundant, these cycle lanes. I said, well, there's a lot of people that cycle all year round now. The weather doesn't turn them off. You just adjust. So I think it's about changing people's perceptions and behaviours and their current mindsets to how things should be, because that's just how they should be. We've got a couple of minutes before this end. I just wanted to, any final points from each of you? Mark, do you want to give a plug out to any of the ways that anyone can get in touch if they're a community group and want to feed into the cell stuff as an example?
Yeah, so my final thoughts are, there's never been a better time in our history to work together and create a better city, but we need to hear from as many people as possible and listen to people's ideas and opinions. So if people want to email me directly, they can do. It's mcharlton@dmu.ac.uk, and community group representatives can email me and come along to some of the consultations next week. I'll organise that. That's fine. But yeah, my message is we need to sort of stick together, and we can create something quite unique for Leicester. I do believe that.
Brilliant. And we'll get the email address put up so everyone can see it. And Chris, from you? Is Chris still there? He looks like he's dropped out again. He's frozen out. We go to a break. We'll go straight to the break, and I'll see you on the other side. Mark, Chris, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The thing.
The East Midlands is the only region in the country which doesn't have a single children's hospital.
I think if people are made aware of the situation and the plight that we don't have this single use unit.
We have to, I suppose, ship them away to another facility because of the specialty there.
Transferring sometimes as many as 9 patients to other wards, which is very frustrating for the families.
We just never knew where we were going to be from one moment to the next. So you could be in one ward, we might be there for another couple of hours, and then we were back where we were again. So yeah, it's quite stressful.
You actually don't want to leave the hospital. You want to be there by their bedside 24/7.
Family needs to care for the child round the clock, and we don't have a dedicated centre for children treatment. They are our future.
The people of Leicester are amazing people, and I think with the right message, with the right heart, people will get out, they'll mobilise and they'll make it happen.
Thousands of dedicated people just like you have already helped to save our world-renowned Children's Heart Services. Join us in the first step of the journey to move these services to the Leicester Royal Infirmary.
Including Leicester City Football.
They've been amazing.
He put those words, Leicester Royal Infirmary, out into the media. That is part of his legacy and his life, the contributions he gave to the children's charities.
When they took care of them in intensive care, you know, they were absolutely incredible. The level of care they give these children is unbelievable.
Staff who work there care about the children, and they want them to get better, and they want them to be there, achieve their 100%.
Support our appeal to build a dedicated state-of-the-art children's hospital in Leicester. The hospital our children deserve. Let's do them proud.
Make life a lot less stressful, I think, wouldn't it? Especially if you're in here long term.
It could be anybody's child. This is our hospital. It's for our children. It's in our city.
The East Midlands is the only region in the country which doesn't have a single children's hospital.
I think if people are made aware of the situation and the plight that we don't have this single use unit.
We have to, I suppose, ship them away to another facility because of the specialty there.
Transferring sometimes as many as 9 patients to other wards, which is very frustrating for the families.
We just never knew where we were going to be from one moment to the next. So you could be in one ward, we might be there for another couple of hours, and then we were back where we were again. So yeah, it's quite stressful.
You actually don't want to leave the hospital. You want to be there by their bedside 24/7.
Family needs to care for the child round the clock, and we don't have a dedicated centre for children treatment. They are our future.
The people of Leicester are amazing people, and I think with the right message, with the right heart, people will get out, they'll mobilise and they'll make it happen.
Thousands of dedicated people just like you have already helped to save our world-renowned Children's Heart Services. Join us in the first step of the journey to move these services to the Leicester Royal Infirmary.
Including Leicester City Football.
They've been amazing.
He put those words, Leicester Royal Infirmary, out into the media. That is part of his legacy and his life, the contributions he gave to the children's charities.
When they took care of him in intensive care, you know, they were absolutely incredible. The level of care they give these children is unbelievable.
Staff who work there care about the children, and they want them to get better, and they want them to be there, achieve their 100%.
Support our appeal to build a dedicated state-of-the-art children's hospital in Leicester, the hospital our children deserve. Let's do them proud.
Make life a lot less stressful, I think, wouldn't it? Especially if you're in here long term.
It could be anybody's child.
This is our hospital. It's for our children. It's in our city.
The East Midlands is the only region in the country which doesn't have a single children's hospital.
I think if people are made aware of the situation and the plight that we don't have this single use unit.
We have to, I suppose, ship them away to another facility because of the specialty there.
Transferring sometimes as many as 9 patients to other wards, which is very frustrating for the families.
We just never knew where we were going to be from one moment to the next. So you could be in one ward, we might be there for another couple of hours, and then we were back where we were again. So yeah, it's quite stressful.
You actually don't want to leave the hospital. You want to be there by their bedside 24/7.
Family needs.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to Ramadan FM 87.7 FM. This is Kirk Master doing COVID-19 in the community. The second part of my show today, I'm very pleased he was able to do this at the last minute for me, so I'm really grateful to him. He's Riaz. I'll ask him to introduce himself in a minute. The second part of this show, as I mentioned earlier on, is in relation to schools, just purely down to the number of conversations that I've had with people and messages on social media and via email, and just general conversation, that there's a lot of apprehension in the community about schools and this return date of the 1st of June, and are schools going to be open? Is it going to be safe to send our children back to school? Is it safe for the staff and for parents, etc., etc.? A number of questions that I don't have the expertise to open, so I thought, let me get somebody who can answer those questions on the show with that expertise to do it. So Riaz, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum listeners, assalamu alaikum Kirk, head teacher of the 2 Madani schools, Madani boys and Madani girls. I'll try and offer as much expertise and experience as I possibly can. But I can only really speak from my experience in terms of what our context is. And I think across the country, that's what most head teachers are doing.
Brilliant. I've got a couple of questions that I've kind of lined up for this, but just in the round, in terms of the advice that's coming from central government at this moment in time for a guideline for schools to reopening on the 1st of June. in your personal opinion, as a head and somebody that's got to mobilize that, you know, how many people you have? Hundreds and hundreds of pupils across both schools, don't you? Staff teams, etc., etc. Is that possible? Is it really possible to do that by the 1st of June?
Simple answer would be no. The slightly lengthy answer would be, look, there's daily updates coming through almost daily from the government, from Department of Education, from other bodies, the BMA, medical, professionals, healthcare professionals, from the unions, from different trusts. Most of us heads are suffering information overload. We've got update fatigue. We barely have time to even read all of it and put it into a meaningless document, let alone finalize a planning document or a risk assessment that we can then go to consultancy with our stakeholders, or consultation with our stakeholders. So we are very far from a stage where we have a final document that whatever the meaning of safe is, that we're in a position where we can say, look, we are comfortable to proceed. We will not go to consultation until we feel that we have thoughtfully scrutinized, meticulously planned, looked at all of the information that's there, and then seen if it can be done. If it cannot be done, it won't be done. If we don't feel we can do it and mitigate most of the areas, we will not go back, because we're very mindful of the risk of particularly BME demographic, which is 99% of our students.
Yeah, that's a key point actually that I was going to come on to. Given the stats as well that are saying potentially BME communities are 4 times more likely to suffer with COVID-19 and the symptoms and so on, deaths, etc. Being in a predominantly ethnic minority area with all your pupils, and that must be a really, the guidance is unilateral across every school in the country, but the demographics change, the geography changes. So how do you bring that into account?
See, I don't think it's been considered enough. If we look at it purely on the metrics of 4 times more risk, if the vague statement has been used of face-to-face for year 10s, for us in a secondary context, the term being used is face-to-face, which is vague. That could mean very creative methods of face-to-face, more enhanced methods of doing Zoom or Teams or the equivalent. With subject teachers, where right now it's more pastoral teams making direct contact. It could be outdoors. It could be, virtual. If we're talking about year 6 transition, it could be virtual tours, on a camera where head of year is actually walking the corridors and talking to students on a live stream. So this face-to-face that's being mooted for year 10 in particular in a secondary context, we think we can enhance that in a safer way, without, enhancing or increasing the risk. So what I'm trying to say is the face-to-face option that's been mentioned, if some schools, let's say on one end of the spectrum, are going to go for face-to-face and they're going to look to reintegrate year 10s back in, surely any school with extremely high, significantly high BME students, both staff and students, would be doing 4 times less, would be looking at 4 times less risk, not trying to match countries in the schools across the country that maybe have less risk or very little risk of those sort of students. So
that's an excellent point. If you use the same statistics and ratios, then with schools that have a higher BAME population, either pupils, staff, governors, whatever, parents, because parents are still going to be interacting, you have to multiply that again by 4. Surely the risk is multiplied again by 4.
Very much so. Very much.
So for who will be what's the process? What would be the process for your school in this instance going forward? So would you be having meetings with your teaching staff, with your governors, you as heads? Will you be discussing what's the process you will follow to get to this decision?
The initial discussion would be with the chair of governors. I've got a fantastic chair of governors who has made it very clear he simply wants the best for the students. He shares my vision in those terms. We haven't even met specifically. We've had general conversations about updates on where we are and where we're thinking, We're looking to have sabr, have patience, really gather all the information in. We're going to meet next week. We felt it was better to focus on the unique opportunity that Ramadan has provided for our staff and our students. Take it all in, not rush. If we're using that metric again of 4 times more heightened risk, we don't feel we need to meet a deadline. And what's been wonderful is the city mayor, Sir Peter, has made a similar reaffirmation of his belief in safety first and really not putting pressure on schools. What has really perturbed me as a head teacher, and I'm certain, and I've discussed it with other head teachers, is this presumption that we would return as head teachers or as governors or as schools without absolute vigilance in protecting our learning community.
Yeah.
That has come from certain parts in the country and certain papers and in the media and certain fringe aspects of certain unions. The suggestion that we'd go back without absolute certainty that we can do it is a bit of a disservice, I think, to head teachers and schools across the country who are passionate just about their young people.
And you know, rightly so. You are, as the head of the school, responsible for hundreds, thousands of pupils, the parents that are associated to those children, and you represent the community. So, you know, you've got an unbelievable task at hand. I don't envy the decisions that you're going to have to come to and make, but, you know, I think you're going to have to do what's in the best interests of the safety for all involved. So you're meeting with the governors. What kind of governors do you have? Is there a broad range across the community?
We've got a fellow councillor, Shaman Rahman, who's one of our appointed governors. We've got business community represented. We've got finance represented. We have we have different community interests in terms of demographics. We're looking to broaden that even further as we grow our schools. We have different committees that really scrutinize and challenge me and critically challenge me in different areas, from health and safety to the community aspect, to directly in terms of student learning and how we're going to provide alternative platforms, because the intricacies and the nuances of the time that we're living in is so complex. You know, just the health and safety aspect is so complicated, but then looking at learning, looking at the vulnerable students, looking at those where, you know, hard to reach families where the parents really won't be able to digest and gather all the information, how we support in them. Because the school's role, and this is something wonderful that we've had in the city, is we've really had, look, every week in our streets and in the country, we celebrate nationally and locally individuals who are usually reflected quite, not negatively, but not to their standing in terms of what they do. And now finally we've elevated them to the honourable status that their work demands. And teachers and the local authority and the way head teachers have linked together, everyone has sort of grown together, you know, from the masjids to the funeral arrangers, everyone, the huffaz, everyone has really gathered together really to get through this together. And I think we will. I don't know what the future will look like, but just like my governing body, that I've had no pressure. I've had challenging questions about where to move forward and how to plan forward, but without any presumption that I'm going to have the answers, because I'm quite honest, I don't have the answers and no head teacher does. We get our updates from the local authority, which are very useful, that help us gather the information, get it all together. So it's more about teamwork, and I think it's getting the best out of the community at this moment.
Yeah. Oh, so that's a fair point. That's a fair point, and nice to hear as well. Do you are you having collective citywide meetings with other heads and discussing these things as well? So you're getting a common kind of concern or themes that are coming up in your meetings citywide?
We are, and I think I've covered quite a few of the issues today. I've not heard one head teacher that isn't desperate to get their students back. that doesn't miss their students, that doesn't miss the banter, doesn't miss them.
Can I just echo that and say I cannot wait for you to have my son back, Eva, at school, because I want to get rid of him, not for any other reason than that. He's driving me crazy.
My three at home were more difficult than my hundreds at school, if it means anything. Behavior management is rubbish when it comes at home.
It's very different when you're at home in that environment. And I think that's an important point as well. You know, there's many parents that have their children at home now, and they're having to adapt their daily lives in terms of the way that they're learning. And we were just talking about, you know, not everybody has access to IT and Wi-Fi and unlimited data and laptops and all of those kind of things that some take for granted, and others it's really a challenge. You know, so the way that you're able to maintain their education levels and keep them interactive is really difficult. Even with myself, I'll admit, with my son, you know, through his timetabling, through his schools, you're constantly trying to check, you know, is he up to speed? Is he doing the stuff? They sit away in one corner on their laptop, and you don't know what they're doing on that laptop, to be honest. It's been difficult. Even as a parent, it's been difficult.
Yeah. And you know what? It's a fatigue that you don't fully understand yet. And that uncertainty and the weight of that uncertainty is quite strange. You know, not knowing how to entertain your kids for that sort of amount of time, not knowing what's coming next, not knowing when you're going back. Year 11s not knowing what's happening with their GCSEs. And I'd consider myself as someone who, you know, has got it set up. You know, as a professional, you know, I've got the resources and I can deploy, you know, certain things in a certain way to really assist my three and really support them in their learning. But we're hearing of all sorts of thresholds from the parents that we contact, you know, who don't have a computer at all, who really struggle to get out. You know, single parent families who the mum is shielding and the child needs to collect the work, almost lost in a world, seeing empty streets. There's so many different variables. Every single family is different. Some families who have got the elderly with them, so they're shielding for that reason, and they're really scared, and they don't know and they don't fully understand. And you know, most of the family have only moved recently, and they've got language barriers, and we're supporting with that. So our role, particularly in this crisis and all schools, has really changed drastically in supporting every single individual context in different ways.
What do
So if
you
we're
think?
struggling, imagine what others would have.
Oh, I know. Do you know what? I have to give thanks. Really, I feel, you know, I'm in a privileged position like you. You know, you can provide, and you feel quite competent and able to do that, which is very different to a lot of people. And it's just how we can make that better. That's our responsibility, I think. You know, how we can improve and make that better. And just on the previous part of the show, I've lost the actual quote that Mark said, but leaving nobody behind has to be the aspiration of coming out of this going forward. And I think that's a really good phrase that we've been discussing as part of the recovery cells and et cetera, et cetera. But if we can get to a point as a city, in whatever environment we're in, that we're concentrating and absolutely focused on not leaving anybody behind, I think we'll be in a better place. I've got a question for somebody's text in and asked the question: what advice as a head would you give to the parents of your school that are now looking towards going forward potentially on June the 1st? And I know you've mentioned patience, because it might not happen on June the 1st, and there's no compulsion that it happens on June the 1st. But some parents may absolutely be counting down the days to get children back into school on June the 1st. Other parents might be, I'm not sending them back till there's a vaccine. You know, you don't know. There's two different ends of the spectrum. So what would your advice be?
Do what you feel is right in your heart. Speak to your school. Have open, honest conversations. Most staff are in. Most head teachers are in. I've been in every single day since the crisis. I know most heads have, holiday or otherwise. I've also been in on some weekends. I've done everything from food parcels to just translating individuals' forms from the NHS for a particular parent over the phone. Speak to your schools, give them a ring, ask to speak to someone you feel comfortable with, or someone who can also translate for you, even if it's some of the basic things. We're there to support and we're there to help. If you think it's going to be a silly question, it isn't. I'm asking silly questions all the time. I'm asking some of my colleagues silly questions. Have we thought of this? Have we thought of this? What if we get a send students and vulnerable students, and we just set 2 chairs out, and they come in contactless and sit on a chair, and I have a conversation with them from about 4 or 5 meters away. At least they've met the head. At least I can welcome them and point to the building. I don't need to risk assess. I can sit on that chair and I can talk to him for a couple of hours, him or her, and I can say, I'm the head teacher. I can't wait till you join my school. And I'm so looking forward to you being in our school. I'm so sorry we can't do all the taster lessons. If I was asked that, I'd never say no, and I don't think many people would. So my main one would be communication. Ring your school, ask if there's someone to speak to, convey any areas of anxiety that you have, and just ask the questions like that. You're probably scared right now, thinking, I'm just going to stay at home, let them get on with it. But no, don't. Get on the phone.
Ask the question. That's important. I was just going to ask about comms, because are you going to be contacting parents to let them know what's happening, so you don't have that rush on the 1st of June and the gates are locked, or nobody turning up and the gates are opening? Because I've heard other schools, like I said, you know, my son's school have sent a message out already, setting out kind of where they're going to go. So I'm very aware of that. I think that'll be important as well.
I'm working on the letter as we speak.
Okay.
I'm very mindful at this time of year. I normally do a Ramadan and Eid message. I was very mindful not to send it out today or yesterday, because obviously via electronic methods we get it sent out. You don't want to give the impression that I'm announcing Eid and then get in trouble. So I've got to time it right.
Time it right.
I'm hoping we're all going to be celebrating together. So yeah,
we've got 20 seconds, Riaz. Just give me 10 seconds of a message for those that are worried going forward.
We will open again. We will get back to normal again. It won't be the same again. It will be better. I think schools will be better. I think society will be fairer. I think we will address some of those inequalities in our schools and across society. I've seen that dedication across the board. So inshallah, that's my hope, and that's what I've seen so far.
Thank you. And could I just say finally to everybody, as I think it's my final show now, Jazakallah for putting up with me for the past couple of weeks. I hope you have a great Eid and finish off your Ramzan, and pray for us all